Anna Parker, a park ranger at Mount Redwood National Park, had always found solace in the embrace of the forest, with towering trees that seemed to touch the sky and a cacophony of wildlife filling the air. This vast and wild place had become her sanctuary. She had grown up with a profound connection to nature. Her mother, a dedicated wildlife biologist, had passed on a deep love for animals and their preservation. Anna had always admired her mother's ability to see the intricate beauty in the smallest creature or the most delicate ecosystem. But 3 years ago, that world had come crashing down when her mother suddenly passed away from a rare illness. The loss had left a gaping hole in Anna's heart, one that no amount of time seemed to heal. The death of her mother had been an indescribable blow. The woman who had been her mentor, her guide, and her biggest supporter was gone. At first, Anna had struggled to find her place in the world. She had tried to keep her life going, returning to the park where she worked. But the forest that once brought her peace now felt unbearably empty. The trees, which had always seemed to whisper comfort, now seemed silent in their solemnity. Yet, as time passed, she found herself returning to the forest again and again, seeking the healing that it had always provided her. It was as if the land itself had understood her grief and wrapped her in its timeless embrace. Mount Redwood, with its ancient redwoods standing like sentinels over the landscape, was a place of both awe and mystery. The park was vast, stretching for miles with dense forests, cascading waterfalls, and rugged cliffs. The park had always felt like an untouched paradise, a haven for wildlife and a place where humans were mere visitors. It was in this expanse that Anna had found her calling as a park ranger. Her mother's teachings had guided her, and she had developed an intimate understanding of the forest. She knew its rhythms, the calls of the birds, the rustle of leaves underfoot, the scent of the earth after a rainstorm, and the hidden paths known only to those who had spent years navigating its terrain. One chilly winter morning, the sun had barely broken through the mist when Anna set out on her usual patrol along the frozen creek. The cold air nipped at her cheeks, and her breath hung in the air, crystallizing as she walked. The forest was still, save for the crunch of her boots against the snow. Snowflakes fluttered down gently, landing on the branches and carpeting the forest floor in a blanket of white. It was a serene scene, yet Anna couldn't shake the lingering sense of something unusual in the air. As she continued along the creek, her thoughts wandered back to her mother, remembering how they used to walk this very path together, discussing everything from the behavior of the local elk to the tiny insects that lived in the soil. Anna's gaze shifted to the edge of the creek, where the ice had begun to crack in places, revealing the rushing water beneath. As she neared a bend in the creek, something caught her eye. A small figure lay on the bank, partially obscured by the underbrush. Her heart skipped a beat as she rushed toward it. As she drew closer, she realized it was a bear cub, abandoned, alone, and trembling. The cub was curled up on the frozen ground, its fur matted with snow, and it looked as though it could barely lift its head. Anna's heart ached for the tiny creature. She knelt beside it, careful not to startle it. The cub's eyes were wide with fear, and its body was shivering uncontrollably. Its condition was dire. It was too young to be out in such a cold environment. And there was no sign of its mother. Anna's mind raced as she assessed the situation. A mother bear would never abandon her cub, especially not in winter. Something must have happened. The possibility of predators or even a tragic accident was high, and Anna knew she had to act quickly. Without hesitation, she reached for her radio and called in a rescue request. Her voice steady but urgent as she explained the situation. She knew that time was of the essence. The cub was weak, malnourished, and exposed to the bitter cold. As she spoke into the radio, Anna gently cradled the cub in her arms, feeling its fragile body tremble against her chest. She spoke softly to it, her voice a soothing murmur, trying to comfort the creature as best as she could. "You're safe now," she whispered. Her words meant more for herself than for the bear. The cub whimpered, its little claws weakly gripping her jacket. Anna carefully adjusted her grip to keep it warm and secure. The wind had picked up, and the temperature was dropping even further. She knew the rescue team would take some time to reach her. But there was no way she was going to leave the cub alone in its fragile state. As she waited, Anna couldn't help but reflect on the symbolism of the moment. In that moment, holding the vulnerable cub in her arms, she felt a deep connection to her mother. Her mother had always taught her that nature was a cycle, a delicate balance between life and death, survival and loss. Anna had spent years learning about the importance of protecting the creatures that inhabited this land. But this was different. This wasn't just a job anymore, it was personal. She had lost her mother, and now she was determined not to let this cub face the same fate. She would ensure it had a chance at life, just as she had been given a chance to heal. The minutes felt like hours as Anna held the cub, the cold seeping into her bones. But eventually, the sound of footsteps crunching in the snow reached her ears. The rescue team had arrived. Together, they carefully wrapped the cub in blankets and prepared to transport it to a wildlife rehabilitation center. Anna watched as the team worked efficiently, grateful for their presence but still feeling a deep sadness for the cub. As they lifted it into the rescue vehicle, Anna made a silent promise that she would do everything in her power to help the bear cub survive and thrive. As the truck disappeared into the distance, Anna stood there for a moment longer, staring out at the vast, snow-covered forest. The trees stood silent, the wind whispering through the branches. She felt a sense of calm wash over her, a reassurance that the forest, in all its wildness, had a way of balancing itself. And in that moment, Anna understood something profound. The forest, much like life, was both beautiful and fragile. Yet, it was also resilient, just like her. Anna hurriedly approached the tiny bear cub, her heart pounding in her chest. As she knelt beside it, she could see how weak it was. Its body trembled with cold, and it was breathing shallowly, each breath coming in labored gasps. The cub's fur was wet, matted with ice and snow, and its skin had a pale, sickly hue. Anna felt a wave of panic wash over her as she gently placed her hand on its tiny body. Her fingers brushing against the damp, trembling fur, it felt like a fragile, helpless thing, barely hanging on to life. She could see that it was barely conscious, and the faintest signs of injury were visible along its legs, scrapes, bruises, and what appeared to be a deeper wound on its side. The cub's eyes were glassy, its pupils dilated in terror and confusion. She knew she had to act fast. Her mind raced as she weighed her options. The cub was clearly in no condition to survive on its own. Not in the brutal winter conditions that had settled over the forest. It was too weak, too vulnerable, and it needed immediate help. She thought back to the protocols she had learned during her training. The ones that focused on rescue and rehabilitation. But there was no time to waste on bureaucratic red tape. This was a life and death situation. Anna gently scoops the cub into her arms, cradling it close to her chest, trying to provide some warmth. The bear cub whimpered softly, its tiny body shuddering as Anna stood and began to move quickly toward the ranger station. As she walked, a nagging thought gnawed at her mind. Was she doing the right thing? Should she have left the cub where it was, trusting that nature would take its course? Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, reminding her of the delicate balance of nature, the importance of respecting the wild and leaving things undisturbed. But this was different. This was an innocent creature, a baby, who had been abandoned in the harshest of circumstances. The more she thought about it, the more she knew that she couldn't just leave it to die alone in the cold. She would do everything she could to help it, even if that meant breaking the rules. When Anna reached the ranger station, she rushed inside, her breath coming in quick, shallow bursts. She set the cub gently on the small cot in the corner of the station, wrapping it in a thick wool blanket. The fire in the stove crackled softly, casting a warm glow across the room, but the cub's body remained cold to the touch. Anna quickly ran to the medical supplies cabinet and gathered what she would need to assess the cub's condition. She had to act quickly to prevent hypothermia from taking its toll. But she was also mindful of the wounds that might require more attention. As she worked, Anna's thoughts were consumed with worry. She checked the cub's wounds, gently probing the cuts and bruises, cleaning him as best as she could with antiseptic wipes. It was clear that the cub had been through something traumatic. The wounds were consistent with a fall or some kind of rough encounter with the environment. There were no signs of bullet wounds or other human-inflicted injuries. But the possibility of an animal attack could not be ruled out. Anna knew that the cub was exhausted, probably starving, and suffering from dehydration. She ran a warm compress over its tiny body, hoping to bring some warmth back into its limbs, and slowly fed it small sips of water. The cub's breathing was still shallow, and Anna's heart sank with every labored inhale. She had no experience with raising a bear cub, and the weight of the responsibility felt heavy. What if she wasn't doing enough? What if her presence in its life would only make things worse? The question haunted her throughout the night. She knew that the natural bond between a mother bear and her cub was crucial to its survival and development. Had she stolen this cub from its mother, from its natural path? Could it ever find its way back to the wild? Or would it forever depend on human intervention? Anna couldn't answer these questions. All she knew was that the cub needed her now, and she couldn't turn away. As she sat by the cot, watching the cub's fragile body rise and fall with each shallow breath, she made a silent vow to do everything in her power to help it. Her mother had taught her that compassion and empathy were powerful tools in the face of suffering. Anna would not let this cub die because of an accident, a momentary lapse in the forest's seemingly perfect harmony. She stayed up throughout the night, alternating between checking on the cub's condition and tending to the fire to keep the cabin warm. She had wrapped the cub in every blanket she could find, trying to keep its small body from getting any colder. The poor creature seemed to be fighting for its life with everything it had. But its strength was waning. Anna's thoughts kept returning to her mother, how her calm, assured presence had always made everything feel manageable, even in the darkest times. How had she known the right thing to do? Had she ever had doubts? Or had she simply trusted that the natural world would always find a way? At some point during the night, the cub stirred slightly, its eyes fluttered open, and Anna felt a spark of hope rise within her. It wasn't much, just a small movement, a flicker of life, but it was enough to give her the strength to carry on. She gently strokes the cub's fur, her touch light and comforting. "You're going to be okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if the cub could hear her. The night stretched on, filled with moments of uncertainty and quiet determination. Anna had no answers, no way of knowing whether her decision was right. But one thing was clear. She had chosen to fight for this little life. And she would keep fighting for as long as it took. As dawn began to break, casting a pale light across the snow-covered landscape outside, Anna felt a renewed sense of purpose. The future of the cub was still uncertain. But for now, it was alive, and that was enough for her. It was a fragile victory, but a victory nonetheless. As long as she could, she would keep the cub safe, hoping that one day, it would be strong enough to survive on its own in the wild once more. Anna sat in the dim light of the ranger station, her eyes fixed on the small bear cub curled up on the cot. She hadn't slept all night. Not even for a moment. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the cub's fragile body, trembling with cold, and the shallow, labored breaths it took. Every time it stirred or whimpered, her heart would race in fear. She kept checking its temperature, trying to make sure it wasn't slipping further away from her grasp. She had managed to warm it, feed it a little, and even soothe it when it whimpered. But the uncertainty still gnawed at her. She kept asking herself if she was doing the right thing, if she had made the correct decision in bringing the cub into the cabin, away from its natural environment. The weight of that doubt lingered heavily in her chest. But as the hours passed and dawn began to filter through the trees outside, a small, fragile hope began to grow inside her. The cub, though still weak, seemed to be breathing a little easier. Its tiny body was not trembling as violently as before, and its fur, though damp, seemed to be drying. Its eyes fluttered open a few times, and each time it gazed up at her, Anna's heart softened. It was still a long way from recovery, but she could sense that something inside the cub was starting to fight back. Her thoughts turned inward as she watched the cub. She remembered the stories her mother used to tell her about the resilience of bears and the incredible strength they possessed. Her mother had always been fascinated by the way animals in the wild adapted to their surroundings, how they learned to survive even in the harshest conditions. The wild is unforgiving, her mother would say, but it also teaches us the greatest lessons in survival. It teaches us the importance of resilience. Anna could almost hear her mother's voice in her mind now. She had always admired her mother's calm wisdom, her deep understanding of the natural world. Her mother had often said that bears, in particular, were symbols of strength and perseverance. A bear will fight to survive, no matter what, she had explained. They're born into the world with an instinct to live, to thrive, and they never give up. They never let go of the will to live, even in the face of adversity. As Anna watched the cub, she held on to that thought, the belief that it had inherited that same resilience. She had to believe it. She had to believe that this cub, fragile as it was, would fight its way through this, just like its mother would have done. She sat quietly, her hand resting gently on the cub's side, feeling its weak but steady breath. She hoped, with all her heart, that the cub's mother would come back, that it would find its way home. She knew the bond between a mother bear and her cub was strong, primal even, and that somewhere, deep in the forest, the mother would be searching for her lost baby. The minutes ticked by, each one stretching longer than the last. The wind outside had started to pick up, and Anna could hear the distant rustling of the trees. It was a sound that always made her feel connected to the forest, to everything that lived within it. But as she sat there, listening, a new sound suddenly broke through, the deep, rumbling growl of a bear. It came from outside the station, just beyond the trees. Anna froze, her breath catching in her throat. The growl was low and menacing, but there was something familiar about it. It was a sound she knew well, a sound that belonged to the wild. But it was different now. This wasn't the growl of a threat or a challenge, it was something else. Something more urgent. The cub stirred again, its small body twitching slightly. Anna looked down at it, her heart pounding in her chest. The sound of the growl grew louder, closer. Anna stood up, her legs trembling as she moved toward the door. She opened it slowly, peering out into the thick woods. The wind had shifted, and the air felt charged with anticipation. Then, in the distance, she saw something, a large shadow moving through the trees. It was unmistakable, a bear, and it was moving quickly, its massive form moving with purpose. Anna's breath caught in her throat as she realized what was happening. The bear was coming toward the ranger station, moving directly toward her. For a brief moment, her mind raced with fear. Was this the mother, or was it another bear? Drawn by the scent of the cub, Was this a danger? But as the bear emerged from the shadows and into the clearing in front of the station, Anna saw the unmistakable signs that gave her a moment of clarity. This was the mother. The bear had found its way back. The fur on its back was thick and dark, its movements graceful but purposeful. The mother's eyes scanned the area, and then they fixed on Anna. There was no hostility in her gaze, only an intense, protective focus. The mother bear stepped closer, sniffing the air as if searching for something familiar. Anna felt a wave of relief wash over her. The mother had found her cub. It was a moment of pure connection, an almost magical recognition between the two. As if the mother had been waiting, hoping, searching for the right moment to reunite. Anna's heart swelled with emotion as she stepped back inside. Looking at the cub lying on the cot, she hesitated for only a second, then moved quickly to unwrap it from the blankets, gently cradling it once more. The cub's eyes fluttered open as she held it in her arms. And Anna whispered softly, "Your mom is here." She walked carefully to the door, keeping the cub close to her chest. The mother bear, sensing her presence, stepped closer, her eyes never leaving Anna. When Anna finally stepped out into the snow, she knelt down and placed the cub on the ground, just a few feet away from its mother. The moment was charged with emotion. The mother bear stepped forward, her eyes full of recognition as she nuzzled the cub with her snout. Anna took a step back, watching in awe as the two were reunited. The mother bear let out a soft, comforting growl, her body bending low as she nudged her cub toward her. The cub, weak and wobbly, stumbled forward into her embrace. Anna stood silently, tears in her eyes as she watched the two bears together. It was a moment of pure grace, a reminder that even in the face of uncertainty, nature had a way of restoring balance. The bond between mother and cub was unbreakable, and Anna could see that in their reunion. As the mother and cub turned to leave, Anna felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. She had done all she could, and now it was time for them to return to the wild. She watched as the two figures disappeared into the forest, the mother guiding her cub gently, leading it back to where it belonged. Anna smiled softly to herself, her heart full of gratitude and hope, knowing that the cub was in good hands. The forest had worked its magic once again. The sound of the bear's low growl outside the station sent a jolt of anticipation through Anna's veins. Her heart raced as she listened to the deep, rumbling noise that carried through the cold morning air. There was something primal about it, a power that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. It wasn't just any growl, it was the unmistakable sound of a mother calling to her lost cub. Anna's mind instantly raced back to the moment she had found the tiny, vulnerable creature by the creek. She had never imagined that this moment, this reunion, would come so soon, or that she would be there to witness it. Anna stood up from the cot where the cub lay, still weak but showing signs of recovery. She could feel the tension building in her chest, her pulse quickening with a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. She had cared for the cub as best as she could, doing everything she knew to keep it alive, to give it the fighting chance it deserved. But now, with the mother so close, Anna knew that it was time to let go. Time to trust in the wild and in the natural order that had been set into motion long before she had ever arrived. Anna approached the door slowly, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for the handle. She opened it just enough to peer outside, and what she saw almost made her heart stop. The mother bear, enormous and powerful, was standing at the edge of the clearing, her dark eyes fixed on the station. She was a magnificent creature, her fur thick and glossy, her body solid with muscle and strength. She had a quiet, commanding presence, as if she knew exactly where she was going and what she needed to do. Anna watched as the mother sniffed the air, her nostrils flaring with each breath. There was no doubt about it, the bear had come for her cub. The cub, still lying on the cot inside the station, suddenly stirred. Its small body, weak from the ordeal it had been through, twitched slightly as it lifted its head. Anna could see the recognition in its eyes. It was as if the cub could feel its mother's presence from afar. An instinctual connection stronger than anything that could be explained. The cub whimpered, a soft, desperate sound, and Anna's heart tightened. She could feel the tension between them, the pull of the bond that had been interrupted, but now had a chance to be restored. Without thinking, Anna stepped back from the door and opened it fully. She stood back, allowing the mother bear to approach. The cold air rushed into the cabin, and Anna could hear the sound of her own heartbeat as the moment unfolded before her. She had done all she could. The next steps were out of her hands. The cub let out another faint cry, its voice weak but unmistakably calling to its mother. And then, the miracle happened. The mother bear moved forward, her pace steady and sure. There was no hesitation in her step. She was coming for her cub. As she approached the station, the air seemed to grow still. The two bears, mother and cub, were locked in a moment that transcended anything Anna could fully understand. The cub, with all the energy it had left, struggled to its feet. Its legs were wobbly, unsteady, but the instinct to find its mother was undeniable. Slowly, shakily, the cub moved toward the door. Anna stepped aside, her breath caught in her chest, and watched in awe as the mother bear and the cub finally reunited. The moment they saw each other, it was as if the world around them ceased to exist. The mother bear lowered her head, nudging her cub with her snout. Gently, almost tenderly, the cub, still weak but filled with relief, responded by nuzzling its mother. The sound of their reunion was almost indescribable, a soft, comforting growl from the mother and the faintest of whimpers from the cub. It was a sound of comfort, of safety, of belonging. Anna felt tears sting her eyes as she watched them, her heart swelling with a mixture of joy and sadness. She had done the right thing, she realized, but now it was time for them to be together, just as nature had intended. Anna stepped back from the door, allowing them the space they needed, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from the incredible sight before her. It was one of those rare moments when the world seemed to align. When everything felt as it should be, the mother bear stood tall, proud, protective, while the cub nestled closer to her side, still weak but comforted by its mother's presence. There was no fear in the mother's eyes, no sign of aggression, only an unwavering determination to care for her cub, to ensure its survival, no matter the cost. As the two bears moved off into the forest, Anna stood there for a long moment, silent and still. Her mind was swirling with thoughts, a whirlwind of emotions. She had been so focused on saving the cub, on keeping it alive, that she had almost forgotten what was truly important, the natural bond between a mother and her child. The one that could never be severed. No matter the obstacles, she had brought the cub in, thinking it was the right thing to do. But now she saw that nature had a way of healing itself, of restoring balance in ways that were beyond her comprehension. In that moment, Anna understood something profound. No matter how much she wanted to help, no matter how much she cared for the cub, there were forces at work in the natural world that were far beyond human control. Sometimes, the best thing she could do was to step back and let nature take its course. Her actions had been motivated by compassion, but in the end, it was the wild that knew best. It was the forest that had its own way of providing the answers. The creatures that had their own instincts to guide them. As the two bears disappeared into the trees, Anna watched them go, her heart full of emotion. She realized, too, that the true lesson here was not just about survival, but about the balance of life. It was a reminder that, in the vastness of the natural world, everything had its place. The cub had been lost, but now it was found. The mother had been searching, But now she had her child back. The wild had a way of making things right, even when they seemed wrong. And as Anna turned to go back inside the station, she couldn't help but smile. It was a bittersweet smile, but one filled with a deep understanding. Sometimes, the greatest gift we can give to nature is to let it be. To trust that it has the strength to heal, to recover, and to restore balance all on its own. And in that trust, there was a profound sense of peace. After the emotional reunion between the bear cub and its mother, Anna stood in the forest, watching as the two figures disappeared into the dense woods. It was a moment that left her feeling both profound and fragile. As if the world around her had shifted in a subtle yet undeniable way. She had witnessed the raw, unspoken bond between mother and child, a bond that transcended human understanding. And it had changed her. For the first time in a long while, Anna felt a deep sense of peace settle within her chest. The weight of her worries, her doubts, and her fears seemed to lift, replaced by a quiet acceptance. She had given the cub a chance at life, and now it was returning to the world where it belonged. The natural world had a way of restoring balance, of righting what was once broken. And Anna now understood that with a clarity she had never known before. In the days that followed, Anna found herself thinking about the reunion, about the lesson it had taught her. It wasn't just about saving the cub or doing the right thing. It was about understanding the power of nature to heal, to restore, and to guide. As she continued her work as a park ranger, patrolling the vast wilderness of Mount Redwood, Anna began to feel a deeper connection to the forest, as if she was no longer just an observer, but an integral part of it. She had always loved nature, had always felt a sense of reverence for the trees, the animals, and the land, but now it was different. She no longer saw herself as separate from it. She was a part of this world, this intricate web of life, just as much as the bears, the birds, and the plants. She began to notice the smallest changes, the way the light filtered through the canopy, casting dappled patterns on the forest floor, the way the scent of pine and earth lingered in the air, how the trees seemed to hum with life as they swayed gently in the wind. It was a quiet, subtle awareness, but it filled her with a sense of belonging she had never felt before. Anna had always struggled with the idea of strength and resilience. Particularly after the death of her mother, she had been taught that strength meant fighting against the odds, overcoming obstacles, and never giving up. But now, after everything she had experienced, she realized that true strength wasn't about struggling against the world. It wasn't about fighting every battle or pushing through every challenge with sheer force. True strength, Anna had come to understand, was about acceptance. It was about finding the courage to face the challenges life threw her way, to endure the storms, and to learn and grow from them. The forest taught her this every day. The trees grew tall, but they bent with the wind. The animals survived, but they did so by adapting to the changing seasons, learning when to rest, when to fight, and when to let go. Anna's mother had taught her many things about the natural world, but it was this lesson that had eluded her until now. Resilience was not about constant battle, it was about knowing when to yield, when to adapt, and when to let the world work its magic. Spring arrived in Mount Redwood like a whisper, soft and gradual. As the snow melted and the ground began to breathe again, Anna could feel the change in the air, the crisp chill of winter fading, replaced by a warmth that carried with it the promise of new life. The forest seemed to come alive once more, as if it had been waiting for this moment, for the thaw to allow everything to bloom. The streams flowed faster, the buds on the trees began to swell, and the air was filled with the sound of birdsong. It was as though the forest itself was reborn, just as the cub had been. Anna watched with quiet joy as the new life emerged. The fawns were born, the bears grew stronger, and the trees stretched their limbs toward the sun. It was a time of growth, of renewal, of transformation. In many ways, it mirrored Anna's own journey. She, too, had been through a period of darkness, of cold and loss. She had spent years searching for meaning, for a way to heal the wounds of her past. But now, as she walked through the forest, she felt herself coming alive again, just as the land was. She realized that she, too, was a part of this cycle, of death and rebirth, of loss and growth. The seasons of her life were as inevitable and natural as the turning of the year. And with that realization came a profound sense of peace. She had found her place in the world, in the wild, in the forest she had always loved. Anna no longer felt like an outsider trying to control nature or impose her will upon it. She felt like she was finally in harmony with it, working alongside it, a part of its rhythm, its flow, its very essence. She was not separate from the forest, but woven into its fabric, connected to its pulse in a way that words couldn't fully express. The more Anna thought about it, the more she understood that true resilience was not about defying nature, but about becoming part of it, just as the trees had to bend with the wind to survive, just as the animals had to learn to adapt to the changing seasons. Anna realized that she, too, had to adapt to the rhythms of life. She had to let go of her fears, her doubts, and her sense of control, and simply allow herself to be part of the larger picture. In doing so, she found peace, not in the absence of struggle, but in the acceptance of it. Anna no longer felt alone in her grief or in her journey. The forest, with all its quiet strength and resilience, had taught her that she was never alone. It had been with her all along, guiding her, supporting her, and showing her the way. And as the spring days stretched longer, as the flowers bloomed and the world around her came to life, Anna felt that she, too, was blooming. She had found her place, her peace, and her purpose. She was no longer just a woman trying to survive. She was part of something larger, something beautiful and wild, and in that wildness, she had found her home.
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please comment 1. And if you didn't, just hit like. See you in the next videos.